Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Welcome to another major patch. This is Grinding Gear Games' second big patch of the 0.5 season. This is patch 0.5.2. Now, most of the time when we're looking at patch notes, I can immediately say at the start, hey, these are the three biggest changes there. This is one of those patches where that's actually kind of hard to do. And that's not because there's no individually big lines here. It's just that which ones of these lines are big isn't necessarily going to be the same for every player. On top of that, there's also a couple of things in here that are going to be moderate impact to pretty much everyone. And so for that reason, I think this is going to be one of those weird patches where pretty much every line in this is going to have some degree of significant impact, but nothing really stands out as the line of the patch. On top of this patch has gone live already. I just quickly checked in-game that it is live, so all of these changes are currently affecting you at the moment. Probably the single biggest change, I did say it's hard to pick one, but probably the single biggest one is that two monsters that have been collectively responsible for more than 1.4 million character deaths. These two monsters have been nerfed. More on those later when we get to having a look at some of the monster balances. And pretty much where there's been nerfs to monsters, they've all been nerfs. It's not like there's a couple of monsters that were like, this monster's been a bit too harmless, giving it a little bit of a boost. No, it's pretty much across the board, those monsters have been becoming easier. The first section is called Endgame Changes. Now this is mostly dealing with changes to the way that you open maps. So that will be anything related to the Atlas tree or the like. Quickly going through here, we have the On the Wind multi-choice Keystone Atlas passive. This is new, and this is designed to empower Azmeri Spirits. Now, this is one of those multi-choice selectors, and there are two different options here that point in very different directions to each other. So, let's start with how you would approach this if your character is extremely weak. Here, you'll take the option, Azmeri Spirits have 50% increased movement speed. This allows them to just disintegrate and evaporate quicker than they otherwise would, therefore removing a potentially dangerous encounter before it can make something much more powerful. If your character is of medium strength, what you're going to pick is Azmeri Spirits are no longer dematerialize when there are no players nearby. Then, you've got all the time in the world to pursue the triple rarity that you get from monsters that are killed while they're possessed by an Azmeri Spirit. But what if your character is already really strong? You're crushing your way through tier 15, even tier 16 maps, irradiated, 3 tablets, 6 mods, you don't care, you can just crush them all. Well, in that case, you go back to having 50% increased movement speed, but this time you keep up. This time you keep up, you kill all of the monsters that the Azmeri Wisp decides to either touch or possess, and you just keep getting more and more loot as a result of that. And this is a really interesting one where, unlike some of the other Keystone passives that don't have the option to turn them off, it's pretty much always going to be positive to have this allocated because there's always going to be a choice that's going to fit whatever your character's power level is at that point. So I really like this one. Secondly, we have an Atlas Master option, Partial Translations. Now this one's being redesigned, and I think it's important to say that this one is probably what I would term a bit of a nerf here. So the old version was a 20% chance to double the effect of explicit modifiers that were found on your tablets. Now, the reason the old version of this was slightly stronger is because of the way that it stacks. If you've got a few sources that are boosting your loot, you want them all to line up, and doubling the effect of explicit modifiers on tablets is incredibly powerful. So when that was popping up, it would line up on all 3 tablets, and that was incredibly strong. Nowadays, it's not going to be quite as explosive when it does line up, but it is also always going to give you something in every single map that you run, whereas previously it was not always giving you anything at all. After this, we have Mortuary Map. Now, this one, I actually didn't realize this existed. This is only available through Unexpected Missions Jado Atlas Master option. So this is the one where you have a corrupted Waystone and you run that on a map you have no interest in running. Cough, cough, Maya map on the Atlas. You're like, okay, please, Jado, obliterate this Maya and re-roll the terrain that it's on. Well, if you do that, apparently it can also bring up this Mortuary Map, which I haven't experienced yet. At the end of this, you're going to be able to replace a limb, which is one of the rewards that is found normally only in Azmeri's Temple, and that's going to be available at the end of the map boss fight, if you're interested in engaging with that mechanic and doing so via a different way. And here we have one that is addressing one of the biggest concerns people have about the endgame at the moment. So when you complete the Arbiter of Divinity, And this needs, I believe, to be your instance that you created, and it also needs to be the full version of the fight, so not the quest version. When you defeat the Arbiter of Divinity, you will gain access to your choice of 5 different ancient mechanisms. Each one of these will complete an area of the fortress. So now the game is giving you indicators to alert you to the fact that this is an option that's there, because this is something a lot of people just didn't realize was an option. Very, very significant quality of life improvement here. If you're the sort of person that pays attention to all of the discussion around the game, this is doing nothing for you. If you're the sort of player that doesn't follow Path of Exile 2 subreddit, you're the sort of player that doesn't really follow streamers, then this is going to be the single most important line in these patch notes for you, because you're going to find out exactly how that system works. Queen's Rituals from the Mysterious Rites Atlas passive, these now have 10 additional omens in their first set of favors. So that's going to be a substantial boost to those particular rituals. Mysterious Rites Atlas passive is now going to describe all of the other bonuses the Queen's Ritual previously had as well. This is something that comes up sometimes. Granny Gear Games will make a change where there's a bit of a stealth bonus to something. Players don't respond to it well because they don't recognize that the stealth bonus is there. A good example of this is the triple local rarity that monsters have when they are possessed by an Azmeri Wisp. Most people don't really notice that because you just feel like you've gotten lucky sometimes, and most of the time it doesn't actually have any noticeable effect. And as a result, players thought, oh, they're not providing any loot, when actually they always were, but it wasn't something that you immediately connected to the monster that you'd killed being special. So that's something that they're doing here. They're making it a bit more transparent what the effects are of the Queen's Ritual. There is a new Necrotic Catalyst. This, if you're playing Minions, is the single biggest change in the entire patch. There is a Necrotic Catalyst which is going to add quality that enhances minion modifiers on a ring or an amulet. And there is also a refined Necrotic Catalyst as well. Now both of these are going to come only from the Genesis tree, and expect them to be very expensive early on. The reason for this is that there is a large established demand. There's a whole bunch of items that are worth applying these catalysts to that already exist, that are in circulation, and some of them are in the hands of very wealthy players at the moment. So these are going to end up being in very hot demand early on, but over time they'll come down once that existing demand amongst the already established wealthy section of the player base is met. Then after that, these will fall down in price a little bit. Fun fact, this is going to make Breach very lucrative for a short period of time. Now, there is also an additional quality of life action menu that has been added to the endgame map. This is solely for controller players, and when it comes to controller play, I am definitely not an expert, so I'll let people down in the comments below discuss whether this is an improvement or not, for those of you that are playing the game with a controller. Next up, we have a section on Delirium changes. Now, Delirium has been the one mechanic that most people I've talked to have been recommending against. So if you like Temple, there's things you can do with the Temple. Temple's had a couple of changes, especially this week while I've been taking a break, but there have definitely been a bunch of them. Breach is good, Ritual is good, and then you have Delirium, which is just like, feels like it's adding way too much danger and not all that much in the way of rewards. So Delirium is getting a number of changes. Firstly, halve the amount of toughness that unique enemies in the fog gain during Delirium encounters. So a quick note on what toughness is. Toughness is a multiplier to the monster's effective hit points, but it comes in the form of damage reduction. So if you have 100% toughness, then this is like having 100% more hit points. So if a monster has, say, 5 million hit points and 100% toughness, then it's like they've got their hit points extended to 10 million. If you hit that monster for 1 million damage, it's only going to apply 500,000, 1/10 of its life. And that is actually reduced damage for the purposes of things like Leech or anything else that might care about how much damage you've actually hit that monster for. So these monsters, the amount of damage reduction that they've got has been nerfed. Now, the tougher that unique monster was, the further in the fog it was, the closer this is going to be to halving that monster's hit points. Most of the time, it's not going to feel like you're halving the monster's hit points, and that's especially going to be the case if the monster is close to the origins of the Delirium fog. But if the monster is way deep into the fog, it might almost feel like you've halved the hit points. That's not going to play out as the monster's hit points actually being halved. It's going to play out as the damage that you do to the monster almost being doubled. And then we have the single most important line when it comes to the changes being made in Delirium, and this is massive. Halve the amount of increased damage that normal, magic, and rare monsters in the Delirium fog gain during Delirium encounters. So these things are not going to become as explosively dangerous as quickly as they are. They are still going to become much more durable than they normally would be without the Delirium Fog, but it's going to take quite some time until they become as dangerous as they were becoming before. Delirium shards on the bar, they're now going to spawn when you get to the correct depth, as opposed to slightly earlier. I had noticed this, if the shard appeared, say, 45% of the way along the bar, you get to like 42%, and the shard would spawn. They're also going to be placed better when spawning to be less likely to be put directly on top of the player's location, because the intention here is that you do have agency over whether you tap these things or not. It's kind of expected you probably will most of the time, but you do have the agency to say, no, I'm really struggling at the moment. I'm really determined to get to the boss no matter what, and so I'm just going to blitz through. Delirium Mirror Shards that are spawned from hitting depth targets on the bar, they no longer persist after Delirium encounter ends either. Now, it's the Runes of Aldur League, so it wouldn't be a normal league without a couple of little changes here. And the most significant change that's taking place here is going to be the changes to Remnant encounters that are found in the highest tiers of maps. So tier 14, 15, and 16 maps. The 3-slot runic inscriptions are mostly not going to appear as options here. The way that I'm reading this is that almost all of them are being removed, but maybe a couple of individual ones might be hand-selected to stay, so maybe you'll still be able to get the 1 Chaos Orb option coming up or something along those lines. Now, if you're running in tiers 10, 11, 12, 13, then these 3-slot runic inscriptions are still allowed to spawn. They're not being prohibited from spawning, but their spawn rate is being nerfed. This, however, is a buff because it means that the 4, 5, and 6-slot ones, they're going to end up absorbing that additional chance because all of 3s are going to be re-rolled as 4, 5, or 6s, or at least most of them if you're playing in tiers 10, 11, 12, and 13. So this thing is a good improvement. Now, the Runefather's Alloy and the Runebinder's Alloy, one of which is very valuable at the moment, these are now going to be found as 8-slot runic inscription rewards in Remnant encounters. So this is something that's going to make those more valuable again. The Bond Rune in Remnant encounters has been changed, and what this means here, we're going into a section here where we're talking about nerfing the monsters that are spawned as part of these Remnant encounters. So it's still going to cause rare monsters in each wave to transfer modifiers on death, but it is going to spawn a smaller number of rare monsters overall, and this is going to be especially the case when it is paired with a power rune. But the number of modifiers the rare monsters can have goes up per wave. So I think the intention here is that it's not going to be quite as explosive, but it's still going to be one of the highest impact individual runes you can get. The Prismatic Rune that is present in Remnant encounters, this is no longer going to provide always inflict shock to monsters. Additionally, the amount of elemental resistances it's granting to monsters is being nerfed. It is, however, going to provide all damage contributes to flammability and ignite magnitude to monsters. The damage that is gained as a random element benefit has been removed, except when a power rune is also present in the encounter. When a power rune has empowered the Prismatic Rune, then it is still going to have that additional effect as well. So keep an eye out for those. Those combinations could be quite dangerous. Every section of the ocean that is revealed by an expedition logbook when you're firing off your logbooks in Boat League, this is now going to be guaranteed to contain at least 1 grand expedition. Next up, there was an item that had way lower base defenses than it had any right to have. The Rune-Mastered Ornate Ringmail Body Armor base type. This was previously only giving 210 armor, 60 energy shield, and 112 ward. This is having its armor and energy shield component almost triple and a halved. This is a massive increase to those. The amount of ward that it's getting is only increasing very slightly, but this was clearly just off the planet wrong in terms of the amount of stats that it had, and these are now going to be slightly less terrible than they used to be. That said, they are still suffering all of the weaknesses of the armor and energy shield hybrid playstyle, which I do feel is the one that is missing the most in the current endgame. The Rune-Mastered Venerable Defender Shield, that base type that provides energy shield, now has energy shield values of 135, previously 56. So that's a tremendous change there as well. Pharaoh can now be invited to your hideout in the Runes of Aldur Leagues, added quest markers to the Runesmithing Knowledge interactables in Acts 2, 3, and 4 and logbooks to draw attention to them. This is very, very important here. The Journey to the East quest item now provides more direction on what to do with it and can now only be turned into Danig in the Ruins of Kingsmarch. So previously you actually had to go back to Act 4, which felt really weird lore-wise. You're going from destroyed Kingsmarch to the thriving Kingsmarch of the past, and you're going back there and providing Danig with all of this evidence of his life after the Cataclysm, his life after Kingsmarch gets destroyed. And then he provides you access to his machine that produces Loreweave, which sort of never really sat well with me. But anyways, that quest is now being fixed. You now turn it into Danig at the Ruins of Kingsmarch, rather than having to take it back to one of the Act towns instead. Transcendent Alloy can no longer be applied to foci and wands. So this is editing GOG. I'd glossed over this originally because I had forgotten which one the Transcendent Alloy was. And this is actually really significant. This is intended to be one of the rarer, one of the more special of the alloys. The old version of this was granting a focus, staff, or wand a percentage increase to cast speed that was balanced around it being present on a staff. However, you could get it on a focus or a wand, and as a result, you could end up having one of these in each of your hand slots. And as a result, it was incredibly, incredibly powerful. I'm not generally a fan of having crafting tools nerfed mid-league like this, because it ends up creating a situation where the best items that can exist in the league can't be made anymore. So I'm not really a fan of this change. I think it's probably a bit of a mistake. It would definitely have been the case that Grinding Gear Games never meant it to be 39 to 47% except on the staff, but that's something that I think is probably a mistake that should have stuck around for the rest of this league, I think. Rog no longer continues appearing at the end of the Uhtred fight if you've already spoken to him there, and the same is true for Danig with Olroth and also for Tujen at the Varana fight. So in terms of the Runes of Aldur Changes section, the most significant things here are going to be, for those of you that are involved in Merit tier crafting or that aspire to being involved in it, this change is absolutely transformative. You must know about this. You must know everything about it. This is going to be the biggest change in the entire patch notes for you. And it's one of those things that means that some items you might have already made that weren't Merit tier, that they now might sell for a lot more because they've got irreplaceable mods on them. At the same time, there's another couple of important changes here for everyone else, but probably the most important one is the buffs to Remnant encounters that are taking place in tier 14, 15, and 16 maps, and the smaller but similar buffs that are taking place in tiers 10, 11, and 12, and 13. All of these are important to know about, and for those of you that haven't yet been able to work out what to do with the Journey to the East quest item or some of the other quests that are related to the Runes of Aldur, there'll now be a bit more clear guidance as to what's required there. And next, may the nerfpocalypse begin. Here we have a whole section that is dedicated to nerfs, but these nerfs are to monsters, not to players, and ultimately nerfing monsters is usually reasonably equivalent to buffing players, at least when you're fighting against that particular monster. So these are the outlier monsters. These are the monsters that are taking out more characters than Grinding Gear Games are comfortable with, and they're being brought down to earth a little bit. Some of these definitely need it. Some of these will be things that I'm a little bit sadder to see, like poor Jamanra. Poor Jamanra losing some of his health. I've got to say that the most fun I have had in Path of Exile 2 so far was fighting Jamanra with no idea what he did on the very, very first day that the game came out, when he was a lot tougher than he is now. And that was a fight that took several times to get right, and ultimately was a 7 or 8 minute endurance battle, where everything that you did felt like it mattered. So that was a lot of fun, but Grinding Gear Games have decided they want to go away from that and have substantially easier fights for some of those bosses that felt like they were tough but fair. And at the same time, for some of the bosses that felt like they were a little bit less fair, those ones are getting nerfed as well. Azmadi Faridun Prince. Dashes can no longer hit twice. Dash skills of Azmadi have been nerfed so that they aren't used on targets that are in melee range. This monster I do think was an outlier. Where I thought Jamanra was tough but fun, I thought Azmadi could be really, really unfair feeling at times. Sayora, the Blade of the Miss, and these changes also apply to variations of this boss found later in the game, is getting nerfed in pretty much every way imaginable. More wind-up time on the Cyclone and Chaos Strike skills. Now, the Cyclone is gaining the unblockability from the Red Flash, so that is worth knowing about. That's not strictly a nerf, but the fact that it's going to have more wind-up time means that overall it is a nerf. Chaos Strike, however, can now be blocked. The Lightning Strike skill, Cyclone skill, melee attacks and combos have had their damage nerfed, and a cooldown has been added to the melee combo skill as well. Lots and lots of nerfs to this particular boss here. That one's interesting, where Azmadi I felt was genuinely tough. Sayora never really caused me trouble, but clearly Grinding Gear Games have more data than I do. Diamora, Song of Death, and Silvora, Daughter of the Deep, these boss fights now only have one petrification phase, so they're just basically being made faster. There's still a gimmick you need to work out for it, but at the same time, it's not going to be something that feels like it drags on and on and on. Poor Jamanra, losing 1/6 of his health. After this, there is Vayner, the Frostbane. His Cascading Slam skill is going to be nerfed and dealing less damage. Again, this also applies to variations of this boss found at endgame. Melgor the Nautilord. This one is a boss that was dealing a lot of damage with the Cannon Barrage. Now, this was one of those Telegraph Slam abilities that you had to immediately react to when it took off. So you had to drop everything you were doing and dodge, but it was also very easy to dodge. Well, the damage of that is being nerfed, as are both of the slam skills. This one where I'm not sure if this was a necessary change or not, because I hadn't been hit by those skills, so I wasn't sure if they were like absolute overkill or if they were doing appropriate damage or not. After this, we had Seraph the Scaled One, the Flame Geysers and both slams getting nerfed on this as well. And Chaos Volatiles from Ritual Altar encounters and also Monster Modifiers getting nerfed again. Fun fact with the Chaos Volatiles that come from Monster Modifiers, up until a previous patch, I have a feeling that this might have been patch 0.3.1, but my memory on that could be wrong. This was the single biggest player killer that existed, and not just was it killing more players than any other individual ability, but I believe it was actually responsible for an absolute majority of all player deaths. It then got nerfed pretty hard, so it went from being horrifying damage to just scary damage. It looks like it's getting nerfed even further again here. Now, a number of other monsters are getting nerfs as well here. The Tendril Sentinel monster, the Sicilian Ravager runic monster, it's getting a nerf. The Krell Skullcrawler, Starlit Harvester, Cultist Archer, Black-Blooded Elite Abyss Monster. All of these are taking nerfs. Lightless Vengewing, Lightless Moray Abyss Monster, and including its Flamethrower attack, the Strider of the Pit Abyss Monster. All of these are things that are getting little nerfs here, but there is one of these that you really need to know about. This is the singular biggest change here. And this entire section significantly nerfed the damage of the Chaos Beam from the It That Hates Breach monster. This was the one that was responsible for more than 1 million player characters going splat. This was the singular most dangerous non-boss monster in the entire game, and it was not close. This thing is getting absolutely gutted here so that it's no longer going to be anywhere near as terrifying as it used to be. The other thing that's getting a significant nerf here, a lot of these are just getting maybe 5 or 10%, but some of these are getting bigger ones. The Rage and Malice Delirium monsters. These were responsible for a lot of players going splat inside Delirium encounters as well. And remember, we already had a previous section where Delirium was getting nerfed, so this is going to stack with that. You're going to find that these monsters, they're going to gain less damage from the percentage delirious that the player is, and also at the same time their baseline damage is getting nerfed, so they're getting double tapped and they're no longer going to be anywhere near as dangerous as they were before. Finally, we have something that is not actually traditionally a monster per se, and that is the fireballs that are shot by turrets in the Trials of the Sekhemas. These are no longer going to create an invisible area of effect explosion when they collide with something. So that's something that had obviously been tilting a lot of players because it was this invisible effect that was ruining their Sekhema run. That is going to be fixed. The next section is termed General Changes and Improvements, and basically it's everything that doesn't fit anywhere else and that Grinding Gear Games don't necessarily consider to be a bug fix per se, but more of an intended design change. Firstly, the Spirit Walker's Bear Spirit Companion. This is getting its presence radius buffed from 4 meters to 8 meters. This is a pretty substantial improvement for certain things that rely upon you personally, the player, being in the presence of your Bear Spirit. That said, 8 meters away can still occur. You can still get outside that range because 8 meters is still within a screen. So keep that in mind if you're spec'd into that. Talking about things that only apply to one Ascendancy and only if you spec a certain point, this one is even more exclusive because it requires you to also be using a specific unique item. If you equip the Facebreaker unique gloves, and on top of that you are a martial artist, and on top of that you spec Way of the Stone Fist, and let's face it, if you're a martial artist, you're speccing Way of the Stone Fist, In that case, the Smash to Smithereens skill that you can only get from that combination, this is going to explicitly state that it has no sockets. So something that's a little bit of a clarification there, because players are thinking, why is this not working? No, it's not a bug. It's something that's intended to work that way. Zarokh's Gift, this passive skill, this is now going to grant a Sinister Jewel socket. Previously, it was granting a jewel socket. So Zarokh's Gift is something you can anoint onto an amulet, and it causes that amulet to have a jewel socket inside it. And this is something that had a number of little bugs early on, but this is an attempt to try and deal with all of those issues that were coming up. The Ice Storm notable passive now has 15% reduced effective chill on you and 15% increased magnitude of chill you inflict. It no longer provides unaffected by chilled ground because this was just flat out not working. And you'll see something very similar for the Lightning Storm notable passive. Neither of these were working, so Grinding Gear Games have decided, right, we're just going to give something else that we can grant rather than trying to address something that's causing us a lot of problems. Bitter Dead has a base critical strike chance of 12% now. And then we have something that is going to be one of those things that will deal with a lot of things that previously players were reporting as bugs. So effects that prevent players from recovering life, mana, or energy shield except in specific ways. Some examples of this are Vilepact, Cat o' Nine Tails, or Indigon. These are no longer going to prevent recovery that is caused by core game systems. So this is including but not limited to checkpoints, healing wells, and leveling up. Now, this also means that changing areas when you have one of these effects no longer can cause you to lose life, mana, or energy shield. However, this is not going to apply to effects that prevent all forms of recovery. And here the most important one is the Eternal Life notable that is found on the Lich. Now, that has a text that your life cannot change while your energy shield is at least 1. And it also has a couple other things, but that's the primary thing that it does. So, with the Lich's Eternal Life, a lot of players intentionally set themselves to low life, and they do not want checkpoints, they do not want healing wells to recover their amount of life, because they want the benefits of being on low life for use of the Pain Attunement notable, which is found in the northwest of the passive tree. So, the Lich's Eternal Life is not getting this because it is an absolute prevention of all forms of recovery, but all these conditional ones, they are getting improved so that they will still be bypassed by using a well, by checkpoints and things like that. Delwyn is getting moved. He's going to be close to the Hunting Grounds entrance, so it's less likely that you miss him. Now, there is a buff that is taking place, or not really a buff, but an improvement that's taking place to the Azag Bog. This is one of the worst areas in the campaign because it is based upon the Maya map, and the Maya map is the worst map in the game. So if you find the Flameskin Ritual first, which you usually will, then it will then provide a little bit of an indication as to where the boss is. This should make this zone considerably faster than it used to be. I know I spent an ungodly amount of time searching every single corner of that map to find the boss of it when I was doing the campaign this league, and it's going to be a lot better than it was. Now, Azmeri Wisps, when you release them from a monster, which is something that is not their baseline behavior, it's something you can spec into though, when you spec into that, they will now choose a nearby target rather than choosing a random valid target as where they're going to then go and try and possess another monster. So this is going to mean that these are smoother if you're wanting to engage in sort of min-maxing the amount of monsters that you can get possessed with your Azmeri Wisps. After this, Devour. It is no longer capable of consuming living players. And liches are friends, not food. So this is something that was clearly a very serious bug that has been fixed. Improve the visibility of rogue exiles as well as their behavior. They should now not also have their life bars appear when they're quite so far away. So this is one of those things where certain rogue exiles can be very, very annoying, and I still am going to request, again, the Grinding Gear Games add a way to turn off Atlas nodes that add rogue exiles to your maps, because whilst rogue exiles can definitely be lucrative to kill when your character is strong enough to do them, they are very, very disruptive when you are trying to tier up in maps. So if you're currently beating tier 7 maps and it's a bit of a struggle and you're wanting to push into tier 8 and tier 9, then every time a rogue exile spawns, you have to give it a wide berth because they can be very dangerous, and sometimes they can just out-heal any damage that you're doing. This isn't a problem once players are deep, deep, deep into endgame. At that point, you just want the rogue exiles on because they're loot pinatas, but until that point, they really need the ability for all of that Atlas support that exists for them on the passive tree. It needs to be able to be turned off. Anyways, rant aside, They're going to be more visible, but they're not going to be as visible until you get quite as close to them, which could be quite scary, especially with the ones that are good at pursuing you. If you're early in progression, watch out. Improved Conductive Runes description to explicitly state that its damage is not based on your weapon's damage, and an effect is now played upon players granting themselves a shrine buff somehow. Now, the next section here is called bug fixes. With the bug fixes section, I think it's a case that most of these don't apply to you personally. However, it is important to maybe have a quick look through. I don't want to go through every single line of text here because it's going to be the case that 90% of the people that are watching this video, maybe even 95%, are not going to care about each individual line. And there's so many of them that it just feels like it's not an appropriate use of your time. However, I did want to point out a couple of important ones. Firstly, Swift Alloys. These have not been available at all. They were not obtainable as a runic inscription reward. This is what they do. They are one of these essence type things that removes a random modifier and augments a rare item with a new guaranteed modifier. On gloves, 9 to 12% cast speed. On a ring, 7 to 9% increased attack speed. And on a belt, flasks gain X charges per second, X from 0.75 to 1. On a shield or focus, 30 to 49% increased totem placement speed. Now, these are important for two reasons. Firstly, there is a challenge just to use one of them, so that's something to keep in mind, although Grinding Gear Games did put in a bypass to that in the past while they weren't available. But secondly, they are now available, so you can get them if you want to actually craft with them. The second thing that's worth knowing about here is there's a fix that's coming up just for a few players. If you have migrated out of one of the hard modes, so you've either migrated out of solo self-found or hardcore, and in the case of hardcore, you might have been forcibly migrated out of that mode, then the Garment of Rings dialogue option with Danig was not transferred across unless you also migrated your entire league process and stashes. So there were a small number of ways that you could get into a situation where you could not access Loreweave unless you went all the way back to endgame and did that entire quest again. And you might not even have been able to do it because you might not have been able to get the specific item that's necessary. Anyways, that bug is now fixed. And one that I think is really interesting relates to a unique item that everyone had written off as complete and utter trash, but that also people were very disappointed to write off as trash because it was something that seemed like it could be really good. This is the Raven's Flock unique staff, the Mist Ravens that are summoned by it. These were not considered to be allies in your presence and therefore were doing derisory damage. This has been fixed, and this unique staff might now have a little bit more appeal than it did before. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. Otherwise, though, there's just a lot of things that have been done here that probably don't affect you, but there will definitely be people that are watching this who are going to be saying, hey, yeah, that did affect me. For example, fixed a bug which could cause some skills to be unusable in Abyssal Depths. Fixed a bug where you could be teleported out of ritual encounters when you are fighting the Fungus Behemoth. And so on and so forth. All these sorts of things that you probably want to know about, so definitely have a read of them. I will put a link down in the description below to Grinding Gear Games' full write-up of the patch notes, and you can have a look through. You'll notice they also dealt with 7 crashes here. I haven't yet been able to play to ascertain how significant a change this is to me. I had found my performance got substantially worse after patch 0.5.1, but that was not a widespread experience. That was just my experience. I was experiencing a lot of extra crashes. One more thing that's significant here, though, that I think is worth pointing out is that the Audience with the King was not available on the currency exchange. This has been corrected as well. But like I said, have a read of all of the patch notes as well. We've gone through the things that I think are highlights, but who knows, you might be using one of the skills that is really substantially affected by one of these other changes. Anyways, hopefully you enjoy 052. I'm going to leave it there. May your Val Orbs have interesting results.